Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're well. It's Rabbi Akiva Males. Today is Wednesday. It is the 4th of January. We are in the new year of 2023. We're getting ready for Parshas Vayechi, which is going to conclude the Sefer Bereshis, the first book of the Chumash. However, today, based on the calendar, rather than talk about Parshas Vayechi, I'd rather talk about a date that many of us are not familiar with and perhaps may never have heard of before. And that is what occurred this past Sunday. We know that yesterday was the fast of Asara Teves, the 10th of Teves. But what many of us may not know is that for years, there was a fast that occurred on the 8th of Teves. I'll show that to you in the Shulchan Aruch. It's not entirely clear when this fast stopped being observed by Klal Yisrael, but there clearly was a fast that once was observed on the 8th of Teves, which you can imagine may make things a little bit difficult. That in the same week as the 10th of Teves, there's a fast 2 days earlier. Just so you see, I've got it there in the first source there, that the fast of the 8th of Teves, the date of the 8th of Teves of this year, 5783, would have been this Sunday, January 1st of 2023. So that's when the 8th of Teves would have occurred. Let's take a look at what the Shulchan Aruch writes. So this is in the Shulchan Aruch, Aruch Chaim. It says as follows, Elu hayomim, these are the days, she'eru b'hem tsaros lavosenu, that our ancestors experienced various troubles and calamities, v'roi lisanos b'hem. And because of those calamities that our ancestors experienced, it is worthwhile to fast on those days. And it goes through a number of days. And then it says, B'shmona b'teves, on the 8th of Teves, which again would have been this past Sunday, Nichtava HaTorah Yevanis. That's when the Torah was translated into Greek. B'mei Talmai HaMelech, in the days of King Talmai. That's how in Jewish literature he's always referred to as Talmai. You'll see the translation there has it as King Ptolemy, and I think it's always a silent P. I'm not aware of anyone pronouncing that P, but that's how it's spelled. Nonetheless, so Talmai HaMelech, in his days, that's when the Jews had to translate the Torah into Greek. Vayechoshech ba'olam shloshi yamim, and there was this sense of desperation. There was a sense of foreboding that existed in the world that lasted for 3 days. That's a very cryptic line that the Shulchan Aruch writes. It's based on a Gemara. So let's see, what is the Gemara's account of this incident with Talmai HaMelech? Let's see. I've got the next source there is Talmud Bavli, the Gemara in Maseches Megillah. It's on 9a and it continues on to b. It says, Maisa de Talmai HaMelech. What was the event of Talmai HaMelech? The Tanya, we learned in a brisa, Maisa b'Talmai HaMelech, and we'll soon show exactly what period in world history this was, but we're first just looking at the Gemara. The Gemara says there was an incident that occurred with Talmai HaMelech. He was a ruler in the Hellenistic world. Again, he was not Egyptian, but the capital of his government was in Egypt. We'll soon see a little bit more about that. So it says there was an incident that occurred with Talmai HaMelech. This is in the days of the second Beis HaMikdash. So it says, Shechines Shivim Ushnayim Zakenim. He forcibly gathered 72 sages, V'chnisan b'shivim Ushnayim Batim, and he set them up in 72 different homes or rooms or cells, basically arrests 72 Chachamim, 72 Jewish sages, and he sets them up, each one apart from the other. And he did not let them know what was the point. Why did he forcibly abduct them? Why did he arrest them? And why were they being held? And then he goes in to speak, either he or one of his deputies goes in to speak to each one of the sages. And he says to them, Kisvuli Taras Moshe Rabchem, I want you, your mission, your task that I'm forcing upon you is to write over the Torah of Moshe, your teacher, meaning Chamisha Chumshei Torah, the 5 books of Moses, write them over in Greek, translate them for me. So God performs a miracle, and he made each one of these 72 sages arrive at the same mindset. And they all arrived at the same mindset, meaning the translation that they put forward and that they presented after working on this independently was absolutely uniform. Now, there's a debate. You see here, the Gemara says it was 72 sages. There are other sources that bring it down as 70. In Hebrew, the work that they have put together is always known as the Targum Shivim. The Targum, the translation into vernacular, which was Greek at the time, of Shivim, of the 70. The Targum Shivim, this was the original translation of the Torah into Greek. In the world at large, this is known as the Septuagint or Septuagint. Some people pronounce it, I've seen the G as with a hard G, meaning a Septuagint. Others I've seen pronounce it as a J sound, Septuagint. So the Septuagint or Septuagint, this was the effort that was known as the Targum Shivim that Talmai HaMelech forced them to translate the Torah into Greek. And this is what the fast, there once was a fast that was observed on the 8th of Teves, because that was the date that commemorated this. I don't know if that was the date they were arrested or that was the date that they presented their final work to Talmai HaMelech. Now, why was Bnei Yisrael so troubled by this? Well, there's different accounts. Some will say they were terrified because if they would have done something wrong, if Talmai would not have been happy with their translation, this could have spelled doom and destruction for those 70 sages as well as all of Klal Yisrael. So there was this incredible sense of foreboding, of panic that Bnei Yisrael was experiencing. That's some ideas. Others say, no, is that by translating it into Greek, which they were forced to do, this now gave the world at large access to the Torah, something that they may not have had access to before. And this could have led to all sorts of problems. The nations of the world having full access to the Torah. And how did they access it? Not in the original chosen language of Lashon Kodesh, in which the Torah was meant to be read, meant to be studied, and meant to be understood. However, now that it's in Greek, every translation, by definition, a translation is also a commentary because the same words don't exist between languages. So now there was all sorts of mistakes that could be made in terms of how they were understanding the Torah. Again, the miracle was that all 70 sages, when they put their work to it and they translated it into Greek, they all came up with the same exact translation. That was the miracle. The Gemara goes on to say that they also realized if they were to translate the entire Torah into Greek and do that literally, there could be many different problems. Some of them would have been gross misunderstandings, and others would have been potential libelous claims that the Ptolemy and the nations of the world could have had against Bnei Yisrael. So not only did these 70 sages who were working independently, not only did they all come up with the same translation, but the Gemara goes on to say that there was another thing they did. Many of them purposely mistranslated. Many of them purposely said, we're not going to translate something literally. We're going to use a euphemism or change the structure of that sentence. And not only was that done any one sage on their own, all 70 of them all made those same amendments. So the final version of the Chamisha Chumshei Torah, the 5 books of Moses that's presented to Talmai HaMelech and his deputies in Greek by all 70 was exactly the same, not just in the words they chose, but in the amendments, how each one said it's not going to bode well for the Jews. If we translate this literally, we got to do something a little bit different. Each of the 70 made those same nuanced changes. That's what the Gemara tells us. We're now going to look at that second paragraph. The Gemara is going to tell us of one change that all 70 sages working independently realized it was the wise move to make. We're going to take a look at this now. What I found, okay, let's just take a look at it and then I'll comment on it. It says, the kasvulo, one of the changes that they made, the Gemara lists several changes. We're just focusing on one today. The kasvulo, and they made the following amendment. In Parsha Shmini, where the Torah lists animals that are kosher and not kosher, when it comes to land animals, there are two signs. The animal has to chew its cud, and it also has to have split hooves. So the Torah lists some animals that have one trait and not the other. One of those animals is the arneves, the hare or the rabbit, that in some sense, it chews its cud. It's not 100% clear in what way it chews it, but in some way it remunerates. and that Arneves, that it definitely does not have split hooves, doesn't have hooves. So when they reach the word Arneves, they realize we've got a problem and we better not translate that literally into Greek. The Gemara says, when they got to the word Arneves, they said instead of translating Arneves into Greek, they wrote Es Seiras Haraglayim. Again, that's this version of the text says Seiras Haraglayim, which would mean the animal that has short feet. We'll soon see Rashi explains that. Velo kas velo es ha'arneves. And they did not write simply what arneves. Arneves is the Hebrew word that's in the Torah for rabbit or for the hare. And they didn't write what the simple, straightforward Greek word for that would have been. Mipnei, why did they not do that? She'ishto shel Talmai, the queen, Mrs. Talmai, Arneves Shema. Her name was Arneves. Shelo Yomar, they were nervous. They didn't want Talmai to say, Sachaku bi haYehudim, the Jews are mocking me. They're making fun of me and my wife. Ve'tilu shem ishti b'Torah. And they stuck my wife's name into their translation of the Torah where it says Arneves is not kosher. Arneves is Tameh. They stuck my wife's name in there. So therefore, they each had the insight and in working independently, not to translate Arneves into Greek, but rather to write Seiras Raglayim, to write the animal with short feet. Let's look at Rashi. Rashi says Talmai. Who was Talmai? Melech Mitzrayim. He was a king that ruled in Egypt. Well, we all know that he was not Egyptian. He was the Hellenistic king that was at that time. We'll get there in a second what history says about him. But his seat of rulership was in Egypt. So then it says the Kasvu. What did they all realize when it came to the rabbit? That they can't translate rabbit. Instead, they wrote Seiras Raglayim. That's this version of the text here, and Rashi's working with that. B'makom v'es Arneves. Instead, in the place where it got, the Torah says the Arneves is Tameh, they wrote Ves Seiras Haraglayim. They didn't write the word Arneves, rabbit, in Greek. Rather, they wrote the animal that has short legs. They wrote that in Greek. Why? Lefish yadeha ketsuros. The front legs, meaning the hands of the rabbit, are short, uktanos, and are much smaller meragla from its hind legs. So the way they chose to translate rabbit was not straightforward in Greek. Rather, what they chose to do was give a description of it, the animal that has short feet, because it's got shorter front legs than its hind legs. That's what Rashi says. There's another girsa, there's another text that instead of Seiras Raglayim, the animal that has Seir, it has short or young legs, it says Seiras with a sadi, with a sin rather, which would mean hairy legs. That it's the animal that's got some hairy legs, meaning about the this rabbit. I've heard this Gemara. I had seen this Gemara. I'd never really thought about it before. But then years ago, when Layla and I were still living in New York, we were living in Queens in Kew Gardens Hills, there was a wonderful family across the street from us. And this family across the street from us, they were so nice, and they reached out to us on several events and several occasions. They invited us to join them for a Shabbos meal. Sweetest, sweetest family. And one time I remember we had them over at our apartment as well, but we went to them for a couple occasions. And they took it upon themselves that there was an older rabbi who was up the street from them, also across the street from us. His name was Rabbi Chaim Gold. And Rabbi Chaim Gold was such a gentleman. He had lost his wife. He was living all by himself. His kids didn't live in the neighborhood. And this family across the street from us, they would take, their family name was Kops. They would invite Rabbi Chaim Gold over to join them for the Shabbos meals. So when we joined the Kops family for their Shabbos meal, we had the opportunity to meet Rabbi Chaim Gold. And it must have been Parsha Shmini. And in the course of the meal, he started talking about this Gemara. And he shared something with me that I want to share with you today because it was awesome. And I love what he shared. And I did some research into it, and I want to share it with you. So Rabbi Gold brought up this Gemara, and he said to me in the course of conversation, did you ever understand this? And I told him honestly, I said, Rabbi Gold, I never really looked into it. I never really thought about it. So he goes, let's think about this for a second. The Gemara says that the sages, the Chachamim, were scared to translate Arneves into Greek because Arneves is the wife, is the name of the wife of Talmai. What does that mean? Do you really think his wife's name is Arneves, rabbit? And therefore, they're not going to say rabbit. So therefore, they give this description of this animal that has Seiras Raglayim, the short legs. Is that what it means? So he told me the secret, if you want to unlock this Gemara, is you have to look up and you have to see what Rav David Tzvi Hoffman had to say. So that's the next piece on this page, the bottom of page 1. Bottom of page 1, there's a picture of Rav David Tzvi Hoffman, as well as a brief bio of him. Rav David Tzvi Hoffman is a name that we should be familiar with, but most of us are not. Rav David Tzvi Hoffman was born in 1843 in the Austrian Empire. He died in Berlin in Germany in 1921. That's shortly after World War I. So he was an Orthodox rabbi. He was a scholar. He was born in Verbo, which is in the Austrian Empire, in 1843. He attended several yeshivas in his native town before he entered yeshiva in Pressburg. That was the Chassam Sofer's famous yeshiva there. And after that, then he went to college and he studied philosophy, history, Oriental languages, and he earned a doctorate. This was a real Talmud Chacham and an incredible scholar as well. He earned his degrees in Vienna and Berlin, and he had his doctorate degree from the University of Tübingen. I'm sorry, I just don't know where in Germany that is. His rabbinical training was at the hands of Rav Moshe Schick, and that was a Talmud of the Chassam Sofer, and also Rav Azriel Hildesheimer, who headed the yeshiva in Berlin. Shortly after obtaining his degree, he became first employed as a teacher in Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch's Real Shul School in Frankfurt am Main. That was his first position teaching Torah, was in Rav Hirsch's school in Frankfurt. In 1873, he moved to Berlin, where he joined the faculty, the Anhala of the yeshiva in Berlin, the Rabbinical Seminary of Berlin, that was founded by Rav Azriel Hildesheimer. And when Rav Hildesheimer passed away in 1899, that's when Rav David Tzvi Hoffman was appointed as Rosh Yeshiva, as the head of the yeshiva in Berlin, and many of the Rabbanim who served in Germany and in Austria and then Western Europe were Talmidim of his, and he was corresponding with them, answering their halachic shailas, their questions, and he was also providing a lot of material for them in terms of how to engage with Western Europe and the Jews living in Western Europe, who were closely affiliated with the Western world, much more so than the Jews in Eastern Europe were. So Rav David Tzvi Hoffman was really a guiding light to the traditional Jewish communities of Western Europe. Now, he also was someone who waged a battle against biblical criticism. Biblical criticism was taking off very at a high pace during his lifetime. And he wrote his commentary to the Chumash, Rav David Tzvi Hoffman's commentary to Chumash. You see, I don't really understand biblical criticism, but what everyone says about Rav David Tzvi Hoffman, is that if you understand biblical criticism, you can see his commentary to the Chumash, was really meant to answer many of the questions that were raised by biblical critics and to show a Torah approach how to answer them. Again, in order to make that assessment, you have to be familiar with biblical criticism, which I am not. I'm just telling you what it is that people say about Rav David Tzvi Hoffman's his commentary to the Chumash, that it really was coming to do battle with many of the claims and questions that had been raised by biblical critics. In his parish on Parsha Shmini, this is what Rabbi Chaim Gold shared with me. Rabbi Chaim Gold said, look here, this is the pasuk that mentions the Arneves. Look what Rabbi David Tzvi Hoffman does. Ha'arneves, when the Torah says an Arneves is not kosher, Arvis in Arabic, how do you say Arneves? Is Arnev, that's the rabbit, the hare, that's what it is. Everyone knows what it is. Hashivim, the 70, meaning the sages who were they were compelled to translate the Torah into Greek. Hashivim Mitargum, they translated it as, and you see there, a Greek word written in Greek script, which I can't read Greek, but Rabbi Chaim Gold could. And he said that what that spells out is dos pedios, which would mean the hairy foot, meaning because again, that's going with the gears of Seiras Raglayim. Velo, and they did not write, which would have been the straightforward translation of a rabbit. They did not write, again, there's a Greek word. I don't know how to read that, but it's exactly what's in English beneath it, which is lagos. Lagos in Greek is how you would say rabbit. So the flat out translation of Arneves would have been Lagos. But instead of writing Lagos, what they wrote instead was Daus Pedios, which was hairy foot, or Seiras Raglayim, or some Girses would have Seiras Raglayim. So that's how Rav David Tzvi Hoffman is telling you pshat in that Gemara in Megillah is that instead of writing Lagos, which would have been the flat out Greek, straightforward Greek translation of Arneves, instead they wrote Das Pedios. So now, what did it mean that the wife, Mrs. Ptolemy, meaning the queen, what does it mean her name was Arneves? So look what Rav David Tzvi Hoffman says. Mishum sheganai haya lebeis hamalchus. Because if they would have wrote that Lagos is not kosher, that would have been an incredible insult to the dynasty, to the ruling family, Shel Halagidim. The ruling family, Talmai HaMelech's family, they were known as the Lagidim, the Lagidites. Sounds a lot like Lagos. Ilu hayu mitzayin es Lagos ketame. If they would have said Lagos is tame, Lagos is unclean, Lagos is unholy, that would have been an incredible insult rather, to the family of the Lagidim. That would have been an incredible insult to Talmai's family. Now he says, Hatargum Hazeh Shel Hashivim, this translation, this forced Greek translation of the 70 sages, Nizkar B'Talmud Maseches Megillah, Tesamad Beis, there's where you see the Gemara talks about it. Ulam Sibas Hadavar Lo Tziyuna Sham Ba'ofen Meduyak Limdi. But however, it's not clearly spelled out. It's so cryptic. The Gemara's account of what happened is incredibly cryptic. So Rav David Tzvi Hoffman says, I just helped explain it. In other words, to really understand what the Gemara means, you have to know some Greek. So Rav David Tzvi Hoffman, who aside from being a tremendous Talmud Chacham, also has his PhD and he's mastered all the classical languages, he says, I'm cracking open the nut. I can help everyone understand that. Anyone who's opening the Gemara and trying to make sense of that, what does it mean? They didn't want to write Arneves because his wife's name is Arneves. So instead they wrote Siras Raglaim. What does that mean? So he says, if you know Greek, here's what it means. The flat out translation of Arneves is Lagos. But if they would have said Lagos is Tameh, it's unclean, it's not kosher, that would have been an incredible insult to Talmai and his family, who were known as the Lagidim. They were known as the Lagidite kingdom. So therefore, they avoided that like the plague, and they came up with a descriptive of what the rabbit was, rather than say what it was straight out. But still, what does that mean about his wife? That sounds like it's more of an insult to Talmai, because Talmai is coming from the family of Lagos. What did the Gemara mean when it says it's an insult to his wife? In order to understand that, we're going to take this one step forward. And I want to tell you, when I worked on this a little bit, I was in touch with Rabbi Chaim Gold a couple of years ago. And I told him, I said, I reached out to him, totally other idea. When Eileen Siegel at Young Israel, Eileen Siegel, after her mother passed away, they were cleaning out her house and they found this set of records there. It was a fascinating set of records. It was a recording that was made at the UN by a reporter when the vote was taken to establish the state of Israel, when the UN gave its charter to the state of Israel. And immediately after, that's when the Arabs attacked and the War of 1948 begins. So a reporter who was present recorded the proceedings and then went around interviewing a number of the people who were there. And when Eileen was cleaning out her mother's home, she came upon these and asked me, does this have any historical significance? I said, I don't know. Let me find out. So I did some research. I got in touch with museums, and they told me it is an important set of recordings, but all the museums had it already, so they weren't interested in it. So I got in touch through the RCA, one of the rabbinical organizations to which I belong, and I said, here's this historic set of records. Again, you need someone who's got a record player. Would anyone like these? Does anyone want them? And sure enough, who responds? Rabbi Chaim Gold, who I had not heard from in years, and probably close to 20 years. He says, yes, one of the people interviewed was my grandfather, Rabbi Wolf, or Rabbi Zev Gold. He was present at the UN as a representative of Mizrahi, and he was interviewed. I would love to have those records. Can I have them? And I said, I don't believe this, Rabbi Gold. I was right down the street from you all those years ago, and I got him in touch, and Eileen was so glad to find him a home, someone who would appreciate them, and we sent them to Rabbi Gold. And then I told Rabbi Gold in an email, I said, Rabbi Gold, I'll never forget, you told me this beautiful Dvar Torah about the Arneves. Can you please remind me some of the details? And we started corresponding. So Rabbi Gold reminded me about all these details. That's how I hunted down this Rav David Tzvi Hoffman piece. But then when I was looking at it, I said, okay, Rav David Tzvi Hoffman, he's explaining why Lagos would have been an insult to Talmai. But why is it an insult to his wife? What did the Gemara mean about that? And for that, we got to dig a couple steps forward. And I shared everything I'm about to share with you. I shared with Rabbi Gold. He loved it. And he was so happy to see that this conversation, which had begun at a Shabbos table, probably in like 2005, was continuing in like the year 2018. So it was like 13 years later, and we were continuing this conversation. He was so happy. And then I spoke to him a little bit. He was absolutely thrilled. We're going to come back to that in a minute. So first of all, just to tell you, how do you know Lagos? Are we taking the Reb David Tzvi Hoffman? None of us know Greek. I'm assuming no one on this call knows Greek well. How do we know Lagos is Greek for hair? So here's just something that I want to prove it to you. Look at this next item. I found this on a recipe page online. You're looking at something. Look at that dish there. It almost looks like a chicken thigh and a polka, but it's not. That's a rabbit leg. Look at this. This is called Lagos Stefado. That is Lagos, a hair stew. Look how they spell Lagos in Greek. And now look at how Reb David Tzvi Hoffman spelled it. Look at the first line of Reb David Tzvi Hoffman, the second word to the end on the left. That's Lagos, how it's spelled in Greek. Look how it's spelled here. That's Lagos. Bingo. It's not Reb David Tzvi Hoffman making this up. This is absolutely real. Stuffed, this is a hair stew, which is a delicacy in parts of Greece. And this was taken from Crete. This was on this Cretan menu, but we know that's a neighbor of Greece right there. There it is. Boom. Lagos. That's how it's pronounced in Greek. And that's how it's spelled. That's exactly what Reb David Tzvi Hoffman was talking about. So Lagos is the Greek translation of Arnevis, of a rabbit or of a hare. I look at that. Wow. It almost looked like a chicken thigh and polka to me, but that's clearly not. Okay. So now we know Lagos is Greek for rabbit. Let's get into Talmai. Let's do a little digging on the Ptolemaic dynasty and what we know about him. So this is from Wikipedia. You find it online. That picture there is a bust. That's a statue that's made of Talmai the First. That's Talmai who, our Gemara is talking about Talmai the Second, King Ptolemy the Second. So that's Ptolemy's father, the original Ptolemy. So let's see. The Wikipedia entry says the Ptolemaic dynasty, ancient Greek, sometimes known as the Lagids. Remember, Rabbi David Tzvi Hoffman said they were the Lagidim. They were the Lagids or Lagidai. After Lagus, sounds a lot like Lagos. After Lagus, who was Ptolemy the First father. Ptolemy the First father, King Ptolemy's father, Ptolemy Melch. His father's name was Lagus. So now you clearly see how they're nervous. Lagos, which is the Greek word for rabbit, sounds just like Ptolemy's father. And it's not just Ptolemy's father went by Lagus. His whole dynasty is known as the Lagids or the Lagidim. So this word is a very, very dangerous word potentially. So let's see what he says. Was a Macedonian Greek royal family which ruled the Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt through the Hellenistic period. The rule lasted from 275 years, 305 to 30 BC. They were the last dynasty of ancient Egypt. Fascinating. So again, Rav David Tzvi Hoffman's on the ball, but that's Ptolemy the First. The Ptolemy of our Gemara is Ptolemy the Second. What do we know about him? Get ready for this one. Top of page 3. Ptolemy the Second was known as Ptolemy Philadelphus, which was Greek. What does that mean? Ptolemy, that's his name. What does Philadelphus mean? Beloved of his sibling. So on a plain level, that means, okay, he must have really gotten along with his brothers and sisters. He's beloved of his sibling. Not so fast. There's a deeper message there. He was the king of Ptolemaic Egypt from 283 to 246 BCE. He was the son of the founder of the Ptolemaic kingdom, Ptolemy First Soter and Berenice. So again, this Ptolemy of our Gemara is Ptolemy the Second. He's the son of Ptolemy the First, whose father's name was Lagus. Okay, he was educated. There it tells you he was educated. He had 2 half brothers. Okay, and they both died. All right. Ptolemy was first married. Who was his first wife? She was Arsinoe the First, daughter of, I don't know how to pronounce that name, who was the mother of his legitimate children. So Ptolemy's first wife was the mother of his legitimate children. After her repudiation, so after he got rid of wife number 1, he married his full sister, Arsinoe II. So Ptolemy II, the Ptolemy that our Gemara says forced these 70 sages to gather and translate the Torah into Greek from him, he was a sick puppy. He was a pervert. He was in this incestuous relationship. He was married. He took his full-blown sister as his wife. In the ancient world, this was very common amongst royal families that they wanted to keep the seed. They wanted to keep the royal family in the bloodline. They had no idea about genetics. They didn't know what kind of problems this was going to create, but this was extremely common. And here is Ptolemy II of our Gemara. Here he is married to his full-blown sister. So not only is he from the Lagidi family, his wife, who is his sister, is also a Lagidi. Now, if you don't trust me, because I don't know Greek and we're working with Wikipedia, how do we know that in classic languages, in Latin or in Greek, Philadelphus means beloved of his sibling? Well, let's scroll down. I believe all of us have heard of a great American city called Philadelphia, which always means the city. Philos means love or friendship, and Adelphos means brother. So Philadelphia is the city of brotherly love. Why is it called the city of brotherly love? Because the founder of Philadelphia, the founder of that state, was William Penn. William Penn, who had left Europe because of religious persecution as a Quaker, he wanted to come and set up a state where everyone could be allowed to worship as they want to, as long as they don't hurt anyone else. He founded the city and he called it Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. We could all get along, even if we're worshiping differently. So again, the root of the word Philadelphia means it's brotherly love. So that was Talmai II of our Gemara. He was called Talmai Philadelphus, almost as a snarky insult. He was Ptolemy, beloved of his sibling, meaning he went down in history as that king who was in this incestuous relationship with his sibling. Now, what did the world think of him at the time? What did bloggers, what did the tabloids think of him at the time? Let's look at this page 3. Last item on page 3. This is from, again, a site I saw that was dealing with that period in world history. The union of Talmai II and Arsinoe II was received with shock and distaste from their Greek subjects as full sibling unions fell outside of what was acceptable to Hellenic sensibilities. According to the Roman Alexandrian historian Plutarch, a poet named Sosibius the Obscene mocked the union in a poem which accused Ptolemy II in a most uncouth manner with the line, and again, I don't know what that Greek was, so I didn't bring down the line. I'm assuming it was obscene. If they call this guy Sosibius the Obscene, and he was mocking this king who was this incestuous relationship with his sister, it probably was pretty obscene what he said about him, what he wrote about him in Greek. But that's a big mistake in the ancient world when that king is living and he's got a chip on his shoulder because he knows people are mocking him. That's not a smart thing to do, and let's see how it ended for Sosibius. Needless to say, neither Ptolemy II or Arsinoe, his sister wife, found this as amusing as Sosibius did, and one of Ptolemy's admirals by the name of Patroclus had him sealed in a lead box and tossed into Lake Mareotis outside of Alexandria. Roman sources also expressed distaste for what they saw as an outgrowth of Oriental degeneracy, and the incestuous heritage of the Ptolemies was frequently invoked to demonstrate their tyranny and moral decay. With this, we can wrap it all up. Here we have this king, Talmai II. He's in this disgusting incestuous relationship. He's married to his full-blown sister. He knows there's people snickering about him. And if he catches anybody who's saying a bad word about him, it's not just off with your head. That's too quick. That's too painless of a death. He's torturing people, putting them down in a miserable fashion, sealing people into lead boxes and dropping them into lakes. He's doing all sorts of bizarre ways to kill people who he thinks are mocking him. With that as the backdrop, now let's go back to that Gemara and let's revisit it. He grabs 70 sages and he says, translate your Torah, write it into Greek. These sages know that this guy's crazy. And he has no problem killing in a miserable fashion anyone who mocks, he thinks is mocking his relationship with his wife. And now it might not just be a problem to them, but all of Klal Yisrael, because he's compelling them to translate the Torah that they've gotten from Moshe and that they as a nation are very serious about. If they write Arnevis, which in Greek, flat out Greek translation is Lagos, now all of a sudden they're nervous. Something's gonna go off. He's a volcano. They're gonna hit a tripwire. They see he's gonna read the translation. Lagos is Tameh. Lagos is the family name of his whole dynasty. And he's gonna say, why are they saying I'm Tameh? Because they're like that Sosibius the Obscene. The reason they're saying I'm Tameh is because my relationship with my wife, with my sister, that's why they're saying Lagos is Tameh. They're mocking me. They could have picked any word and they specifically picked the Greek word Lagos, saying it's Tameh. They're done. I'm killing those 70 and I'm not stopping there. I'm going after the Jewish people. Now we understand what they were so worried about. we understand what was the fear with our Nevis and why they said we're not translating it by writing Lagos, which is the straightforward translation. We're going to give a description. It's either going to be Seiras Raglayim, it's either going to be Dos Pedios, which would mean the hairy foot, or it's going to be Seiras Raglayim, the girsa that our Gemara has, that Rashi translates, the animal with the small front legs, because in contrast to the back legs that are so much larger. That's what they chose. Why? We're steering clear of Lagos. We don't want to use that word because we know this guy's crazy, and anything that could set him off thinking that we're making fun of the relationship he has with his wife/sister is going to be bad news for everybody involved. That's why we're not writing the word Lagos. That's what the Gemara means when the Gemara says they didn't write Arneves because his wife's name is Arneves. That's how, using what Reb David Tzvi Hoffman was saying, that was what Reb Chaim Gold was building on, and there it was. I shared this with Reb Chaim Gold, how he developed this a little bit more, what I shared with you now. He was so happy, and it made him so happy. But here's how the story continues. I've shared with you so far 2 interactions that I was privileged to have with Rabbi Chaim Gold. Number one was that Shabbos meal back in about 2005 or 2004, where he started telling me about this Reb David Tzvi Hoffman and that Lagos is Greek for Arneves. That's the first interaction. And then 2017 or 18, it's probably 18, when Eileen was looking for a home for those records. That was the second time I had a conversation. Almost 13 years later, having a conversation with Rabbi Chaim Gold. I want to tell you about the third time that I got in touch with Chaim Gold. And let's go to page 4. This was wild. As you know, I've shared this in the past, that in the summer of 2018, I put a lot of work, a lot of time into writing over, transcribing the letters, the handwritten letters of David Shainberg. Dave Shainberg, Hashem Yikom Damav, God should avenge his blood. He was a tzaddik. He was someone who was killed. He was cut down. He was a kadosh. He was cut down in the prime of his youth. He was a Memphian, and he was the uncle of Joan Baum, and he was also the uncle of Mrs. Rubel, and those of Mrs. Baum and Mrs. Rubel. He was their dear uncle, and he had left Memphis to go study in the Hebron Yeshiva in Israel, at Palestine at that point. That's what it was known as. And he was murdered there by a frenzied Arab mob, a Muslim mob that had rioted on Shabbos, the 18th of Av of that year in 1929. So in commemoration of his 90th Yortzeit in the summer of 2019, published in Tradition Journal, the family allowed me to print up several of the letters that I thought had great historical significance. And you're not going to believe this. Do you know who one of Dave Shainberg's roommates was in the Hebron Yeshiva? Rabbi Chaim Gold's father. That Rabbi Chaim Gold, his father's name was Moshe Gold. Moshe miraculously survived the massacre. Let me share with you what happened. So this, what I have here on page 4, this is taken from that issue of Tradition. If anyone wants the article, just let me know. I'll send it to you as a PDF of it. It's not long because the family only allowed me to print about 5 of the letters, and I had footnotes because it was fascinating hunting down all the people who were mentioned in these letters. So if you would like a copy of this letter, just of the article, just email me and I'll send it to you. So this is taken from 3 pages. I believe I have on the bottom of this page. Yeah, it's 76, 78, and 79. So here is the first piece you have there is just a title page. When a Memphian thrived in Hebron, letters of Aaron David Shainberg, who lived from 1906 to 1929. He was cut down in the prime of his youth at 23 years old. So here's from one of his first letters. At last I have reached my destination, Hebron. We left Tel Aviv Tuesday, and after spending one day in Jerusalem, we journeyed to Hebron, the home of the Yeshiva Knesset Israel. Again, that was the Slobodka Yeshiva from Lithuania that had set up a branch in Hebron a couple of years earlier. There were 4 in our party. Mr. Mintz, who is touring Palestine, comes from Newark, New Jersey. Moshe Gold, the son of Rabbi Wolf Gold. Remember Rabbi Wolf Gold, this is one I could not believe when I saw this, because Rabbi Wolf Gold, he was the man who was interviewed on those records that Eileen's mother had, and that I sent to Rabbi Chaim Gold because he said those are his grandfather. So if Rabbi Wolf Gold is his grandfather and his son was Moshe Gold, so immediately I was wondering, is that his uncle or his father? And he told me that's my father. And his grandmother, Moshe and I arranged for a room and board together in Hebron. So here is Moshe Gold, was a roommate of Dave Shainberg. Moshe Gold, the father of Rabbi Chaim Gold, in Kew Gardens Hills, New York, was a son of Moshe Gold. His father was roommates with Dave Shaberg. I sent him this. I said, you're not going to believe this. I found out with these letters, this is your father's roommate. He was absolutely fascinated. We had a long conversation. I'll share some of that with you. Look at footnote number 11. Fortunately, Moshe Gold survived the Hebron massacre. His son, Rabbi Chaim Gold, is a highly regarded Jewish educator living in Kew Gardens Hills, New York. He taught in Jewish day schools for many, many years. He was very involved with Manhattan Day School for decades. One more paragraph. We secured a beautiful room. This is describing where they stayed with an old couple, refined people and true Jewish aristocrats. We have a front room in full view of the magnificent panorama, the rolling hills and mountains. We pay for a room and 3 meals a day, £8 a month, which was $40. We could have rented a cheaper place, but I thought it inadvisable to do so. This is one of the only possessing the luxury of running water, and even then, only one faucet. I'm told that this is one of the few places where decent meals are served. So just in footnote 15 I have there, Dave is describing Rabbi and Mrs. Betzalel Samarik. Rabbi Samarik served as a highly regarded educator in Riga, Latvia, before he and his wife moved to Israel and settled in Hebron. During the Hebron massacre, Dave was murdered at the Samarik home, as was Rabbi Samarik and 2 other American yeshiva students, Benjamin Horowitz of Brooklyn and Harry Tzvi Froman of Chicago. Okay, and there I list some places where you can find more information on them. In the end there, it says, by the way, Rabbi Meller reports that somehow Rabbi Samarik's wife survived the massacre. So again, that's unfortunately, Dave died. Dave was there. So I asked Rabbi Gold, when I showed him this, I said, you're not going to believe this. This is a roommate of your father. How does it happen that they were roommates and that the massacre occurred on a Shabbos? Everyone was basically locked down in their homes. How did it occur that Dave was tragically murdered in his host's home, but your father survived? How did that happen? So Rabbi Chaim Gold told me, he says, I'll tell you exactly what happened. His father told him about this. He was scarred for life. Surviving this massacre shook him up to the core of his being. Somehow or another, he put himself together, went on. But he said, here's how his father told him how he survived. The massacre occurred on Shabbos morning. So what happened was the Muslims, the Arabs were rioting on Friday. That's when it began. This pogrom begins. They start to ransack the Jewish neighborhood in Hebron on Friday. The Jews all barricade themselves and lock themselves in their homes. That whole Friday night, they're hearing the Arabs screaming and stuff outside about how they're going to kill all the Jews. And Rabbi Chaim Gold's father, this Moshe Gold, is saying to everyone's locked down in their homes, he's saying, I have to go check on my Rebbe. His Rosh Yeshiva was Rabbi Moshe Mordechai Epstein. He says, he loved him. He had such a close relationship with him. He says, I have to go check. I have to see that it's okay. And everybody in the Samarik house begged Moshe Gold, don't leave. It's not safe outside. And he kept saying, I can't live with myself to be in here locked up in this house. I have to check on my Rebbe. I love Rabbi Moshe Mordechai Epstein so much. He's like a father to me. I have to check on him. So in the dark of night, against everyone's wishes, Moshe Gold left the house under cloak of darkness. He snuck out and made his way, somehow avoiding the Arabs. He made his way to the home of Rav Moshe Mordechai Epstein. He must have knocked on a window shutter, whatever it was, told them who was there. They quickly opened it, let him in, and shut it up again. And there he was. When the massacre occurred, he was in the home of Rav Moshe Mordechai Epstein. The Arab mobs tried breaking into the home of Rav Moshe Mordechai Epstein. And all the boys who were in that house and the people in the house, the Arabs had a battering ram. And they were trying to smack open the doors and the window shutters, everything with it. So everyone was holding with all their might up against the door and the boards that were holding the windows and up against the windows and the doors. And he said at one point, the battering ram came through the door and poked a hole in it, and it knocked out a tooth or two of Moshe Gold. But he said, considering what happened to so many of his friends, that they were murdered, he said, that's a bracha. All I lost in the Hebron massacre were my teeth. He says that other people were stabbed to death, other people were hacked to pieces. He lost his teeth. But what happened? Suddenly the Arab crowd dispersed after breaking through that initial point in the door. What happened? What they found out was as follows, and there's other reports of this as well. There was the British captain of the police, I forgot his name, it's on the tip of my tongue, who was in charge in Hebron, who did nothing to stop the pogrom. They could have stopped it in advance. They could have done that. All the evidence is out there. The English could have stopped the pogrom, but they didn't do it because they didn't care about the Jews who were living there. But what happened was as follows. The wife of that English captain she had a close friendship with the wife of Rav Moshe Mordechai Epstein. It seems that Rebbetzin Epstein and her daughters spoke English. They had learned English back in Lithuania, and they had a friendly relationship with the wife of this police captain. So when the pogrom was going on and the English police were doing nothing to stop it, the wife of the police captain begged her husband, at least do me one favor, get on your horse and just gallop over to the home of the Epsteins, just make sure they're okay. So the husband relented and says, fine, I'll do that. So the husband gets on his horse, gallops over to the home of the Epsteins, and he sees this mob smashing down the door. That was right when Moshe Gold, when he loses his teeth, when the battering ram comes through, whatever pole, whatever they were using, when it came through, that's when it happened. And he had a revolver. He shot his gun in the air. None of the Arabs had guns. They all had knives, they had axes, they had blades and swords. That's what they used to hack to death the Nebuch, the Jews that they killed so mercilessly. But none of them had guns. And when that Arab police on his horse galloped over that captain and he fired his gun in the air, that made that crowd disperse. And that ended the siege on Moshe Mordechai Epstein's house. And that's how his father, Chaim Gold's father, Rabbi Chaim Gold's father, Moshe Gold, that's how he ended up surviving the massacre. So he said it was his love that he had, that he cared so much for his Rebbe, for Moshe Mordechai Epstein, that speaks volumes about that relationship he had with his students. That's what compelled him to go to his house to check on him. And then it was that friendship that Rebbetzin Epstein had with the wife of that accursed police captain. That's what caused her to beg her husband to go over there and just check on the house. And he fired his gun in the air. It's because of that Moshe Gold survived. Because Moshe Gold survived, that's why Rabbi Chaim Gold lived, and he should live and be well, continue to thrive in Queens, and why he had such a long life as a Jewish educator, a long career as a Jewish educator, educating so many Jewish children in New York and beyond, and why I was able to hear that Devar Torah from him, where he shared that insight from Rav David Tzvi Hoffman in Parsha Shmini, that the translation in Greek for Arnevis would have been lagos, and how he used that to explain that Gemara, that cryptic Gemara in Maseches Megillah, that says what was it, what compelled all those sages to translate Arnevis as Seiras Raglaim, the Latin, the Greek for that, rather than just say the flat out translation of Arnevis, how it all comes together. That's from Rabbi Chaim Gold. That's how I have this information. That's what I want to share. But the only reason we have this information is because his father survived. His father was a roommate of Dave Schoenberg Nebuch. He survived that massacre because of those incidents that I've just shared with you. And I just found this incredible, how all these various pieces came together and how they continue to come together. You should know, I emailed Rabbi Chaim Gold this morning when I was preparing these sheets. I emailed him, I said, I just want to share with you that I'm going to be giving this material over again today, because this week was the 8th of Teves. And as we said, the 8th of Teves, that was a day that for many years in Klal Yisrael was observed as a fast because of that episode of the Targum Shivim, because of those 70 sages were compelled to translate the Torah into Greek, and the fear that brought to Bnei Yisrael, and also the damage that brought, because now the nations of the world had a full translation that they could misappropriate and misuse now that is in their vernacular. And that was this week. We don't know exactly when in history the Jewish people stopped observing the 8th of Teves as a fast, but it's something that we should know about. And what the Gemara says about it, one of the edits that they made, and that all of them, the miracle of miracles that they all agreed to, was this edit, that instead of translating Arnevis and its flat out Greek, simple translation of Lagos, they decided to either say Seiras Raglayim, Dos Pedios, and that's how they translated it. Now it all comes together. I thought this is just absolutely fascinating, and I wanted to take this opportunity to share this with you as well. I know that I enjoyed this whole journey and how the various pieces came together. I hope you found this meaningful as well. I'm going to stop the recording.